Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Lodestar Lending Leaders. This is my first episode back in a while. I'd like to thank Elena Gardner for carrying the torch here. We have a very fun guest for you today. Good friend of mine since college, Kevin Streber. He's an account director at SalesScreen, which is a leading sales gamification platform. So today we're going to talk about all things sales related, but more importantly, all things gamification related. So Kevin, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jim. Thanks for having me.
I like that you're calling me Jim, not Jimmy. I'm already a little thrown off here. So gamification, I feel like it's a very, very popular buzzword and has been for a while. Let's just start. How do you, in your conversations with clients, how do you define what gamification is and why should people give a crap about it?
Absolutely. And it has been around for a while. I think there's been a lot of hype around gamification, but it's important that it's deployed in the right way to actually be effective, right? But from a high level, gamification is just applying game-like elements to a non-gaming environment. So taking something more serious like work or sales or your metrics, whatever KPIs you're trying to drive, and applying game-like elements, whether it's competitions, achievements, rewards, even celebrations.
Sorry, I'm just writing down some notes here. You had mentioned in our past conversations, or you just said that this is something that's not new, right? And one of the stories that I like, I told you this, so I'm going to repeat myself here, is this was like in the 1900s. Charles Schwab was working for Andrew Carnegie, his steel company. He goes into a steel mill. It's not performing really well. All he does is get a piece of chalk, go to the wall, and write the number 6 on the board. That was the number of heats of steel that the day shift completed, right? So then the night shift and the second shift comes in. They say, hey, what's 6? And he says, oh, that's a number that the day team did. So night shift goes through. Next morning, that 6 is crossed out. There's a 7, right? Then I think by the end of a few days, that number became like 10 or 12, right? They doubled their production just by trying to beat the other team.
Yeah, I love that story. And it is true, right? Gamification is all around us and has been for a long time. That's a great example, but also Peloton or Strava or Duolingo uses gamification to drive their ends as well.
So, being a skeptic here, right? If I'm, in a more established sales role, financial advisor, mortgage, real estate, I'm working with we have 50-year-old folks doing this, right? They're not going to care about any stinking badges, right? Like how the hell is this supposed to work, right? Like, how do you actually relate it to, folks doing quote unquote real jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. What we find is there is a difference in the way people are motivated, and some of that can be based on their generation. There are generational differences. Younger generations love unlocking badges and getting to the next level. Some of those older generations, typical leaderboard can work. Yeah. People still like competing. People are competitive. So I think with a nice gamification strategy, it's important to present them with the elements that will resonate with them. Knowing your audience and knowing your team. All right, the person who's been in the role for 35 years doesn't care about a gold star, but they do want to be on top of that leaderboard. They do still want to compete and win.
So how are you, when you talk to someone, say they have a 50, a 500 person sales team, whatever it is, and thinking about implementing some sort of gamification in some certain way, like what are those conversations like when you're talking to folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to first start with what are the goals or what are the challenges that organization's facing, and then coming up with a strategy to boost that. Some organizations struggle with building pipeline. So then trying to figure out the path to drive that pipeline. It's not enough to create a competition on who closes the most business, but thinking about the activities that lead to those closes or those behaviors that lead to that, and then gamifying that. I think it's important to think about some of the game currencies. And part of that is fun or things like rewards, but also social capital and self-esteem are also important. Right. So presenting a gamification structure where people are celebrating those achievements building bringing people closer together, building that camaraderie. That's something that resonates with most people, not just the younger generations.
And I think that's a really good point too about, measuring what matters or focus on the activity, not the results. In the mortgage industry right now, we're going through really quite a bit of drawdown compared to the last few years because of raising interest rates. So you have a lot of companies that are reacting, and typically you get to the point you're seeing that revenue drop. Oh, we need to do sales. We need to increase sales, right? That is like always where people go at that point. And usually by the time you're saying that, it's too late. In many ways, you should have been having that conversation months ago. But how are you seeing folks who kind of come in a little bit reactively, or like our sales are down, now it's time to try to do this stuff?
Yeah, that can sometimes happen. And I think that, again, having that right gamification strategy is really important. Most people don't fail to reach their goals because they don't want to hit them. It's because they don't see the path towards that goal. So if you could gamify the path to those sales, you'll have a lot more success.
Right.
And there are some more immediate activities or actions that you can highlight, shed visibility on, and gamify.
Yeah. And don't just say, hey, we want to sell more. It's, what are the activities that get us there? How many more new leads can you get? How many more outreaches do you need to do? Like, that's where you want to kind of make that competition.
Exactly. Are you doing all of those things that lead up to the sale? So maybe if it's a long sales cycle, it's going to take some time,
right?
But you should be able to see a pretty quick result from gamifying those activities and seeing an increase in those KPIs.
So obviously, people like being at the top of the leaderboard. People like feeling like they're competing against that. What about the people who aren't at the top of the leaderboard, or the folks who are newer or struggling in a different way? How do you motivate them without demoralizing them?
Yeah, that's a great point, or great question. Most people I talk to have ran sales competitions, and whenever I ask, hey, do you know the people who are going to win the competition before you launch it? They usually say, yeah, it's the same people who win over and over. The same people get to the President's Club. And that is demotivating. So there are a few different strategies. You could add an element of chance, like a lottery-based competition, or maybe a gift swap, where as long as you get one ticket, you've got a chance to win. That motivates everyone to participate. Maybe someone has 20 tickets and they've got a better chance of winning. Right. But as long as I've got one, I've got a chance.
Right. Or the competition is around outreach and not necessarily closed deals.
Exactly. Layering in some different elements of competitions really helps. And you could create customized targets. So you mentioned about the newer people. If you're a ramping salesperson, you're not going to be hitting the goals or those targets of the seasoned vet. So if you're competing and you could level the playing field by doing percent attainment to your goals.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And wouldn't some people say, hey, I pay my sales folks commission? Isn't that enough of an incentive?
Yeah, that actually touches on a concept of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. And money, that external factor, is hugely motivating. I mean, we're all in sales, or I've been in sales, money is important, but getting that recognition, that pat on the back, is also extremely motivating. And, I talk to a lot of sales leaders who will claim that recognition is even more motivating and empowering than money. But we see money, or that extrinsic factor, being a great way to have a short boost in activity or in sales, but it doesn't do a whole lot for a long-term boost. For that, you need more of the emotional motivation, which comes from feeling connected with your team.
Well, let's unpack that. So you're saying like money isn't long-term motivation then, right? Do folks just take it for granted after starting to get that commission, or why isn't that something that's a continued motivator, right? You think you're a salesperson, you have an unlimited salary if you sell enough. Why aren't all salespeople making millions and millions of dollars?
Yeah, that's a great question, but it does tie to the way that people are naturally motivated. And you could look up self-determination theory as well. I don't want to bore you too much, but people are motivated, like they want to feel connected to one another, and they want that recognition and accomplishment. So I think if you're looking at a game or gamification, there are a few different aspects, and one is money, and that
Right.
is great. But other is feeling like you're autonomous, that sense of autonomy and
Yeah.
sense of mastery. So having that recognition makes you feel like you're connected to something more important and gives you that innate sense of autonomy or mastery, like you're accomplishing something, you're growing.
So it's not that money doesn't matter, it's just that recognition and that other, what, extrinsic motivation matters more.
Yeah, intrinsic, but yeah, exactly.
Intrinsic, yeah.
And both are very important. You know, I think if you're gamifying an environment or trying to motivate individuals, present them with all of it.
Right.
Right.
And when, you know, sales competitions, you said people have ran before, the idea of gamification is not necessarily new. What does it look like when it's implemented poorly?
Yeah. So I think there's this idea of the carrot or the stick, right? And that leaderboard style. I think the old school mentality of showing the reverse leaderboard and posting that around the office. That you know, can work in a short term, but it's really, you know, we would advise against it. That's not the way to create that culture and camaraderie.
It actually reminds me, I forgot, I don't know if I've ever told you this. So my 8th grade algebra teacher, Mr. Plummer, he was a sergeant in the Army, he was a drill instructor in the Army. And what he did is every time we took a test, we'd come in the next day, he'd have them graded. We all line up in the back of the room. And the person with the lowest score sat front row center. Then the person with the next lowest score was right next to that person. And then so on and so on. So if you had the highest score, you were sitting in the back. So very much I don't know how we got away with it, because I don't think you could ever pull that off now in a school setting.
That's horrible. Yeah, that's so funny.
I mean, the same poor girl was front row center the entire year too.
And do you really want to sit all the troublemakers all together? Not that troublemakers, but
at least they're in the front, they're
the
close to you, right? The smart kids, let them be in the back, right? And like I was someone who was always good at math, but I had one bad test. I was in the front corner one time and I was pissed off about it. And then, you know, next time I'm probably studying harder and then I'm in the back row, right? So, but it works for the right type of person, I think, at the end of the day. I think it's, in a school setting, super demoralizing, probably not something you should do, but it just made me think of that when you're talking about a reverse leaderboard.
That's pretty funny. That's a great example. Yeah. Well, and if you have a choice to leave that class and join a different class, maybe you will. You know, I think especially today, there's so much, like the great resignation, or you know, whatever you want to call it. There's so much more importance on building that culture and that team spirit. And everyone being remote's that much more difficult.
And I don't know if you see this in the folks you work with, but we found in the mortgage industry, especially when things were going well, loan officers can generally have a lot of autonomy and something that it's very easy for them to move around. I was talking to one sales manager about some products we were interested in, and he basically said, any of my loan officers could leave the company and get another job within a day. Right. So I don't want to do anything to piss them off or to make them, you know, mad at me or feel like they're like getting put upon or anything like that. Right. There's kind of almost this like reverence of like, just let them go sell. I don't want to, like, you know, ruffle the bed.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, and also can touch on poor gamification. You know, if you are doing the reverse leaderboard style or the stick method, people will leave. But if you're using gamification as a way to boost camaraderie and build that team spirit, maybe your retention's higher. And what's the cost of trying to onboard a new salesperson? You know, how long until they're fully ramped? So if people are sticking around longer, that's huge for the organization.
It's like feeling, I mean, that's the tricky part, right? Feeling like you're not adding another step for people to do. But at the same time, it's something that's helping them build camaraderie, right? Like, don't tell me how many times to reach out. I know how to do my job.
Absolutely. And I think that also touches on, you know, different roles and different, you know, seniority levels. You want to gamify things differently. You know, if it's a ramping individual, or if it's an industry where people just have to make dials, gamifying and having more visibility on those dials makes that monotonous task a lot more fun and engaging. But if it's someone that doesn't, you know, necessarily have to do that to be successful, then don't make them do it with gamification.
And then I think one of the things too that's obviously different about SalesScreen versus 100 years ago writing something on the chalkboard is you can leverage technology in a way that makes this a lot easier and probably a lot more transparent, right? And leveraging technology in a way that actually increases productivity is something we talk about a lot on this podcast. So I'm curious to see how you think about the technology piece of now, okay, I bought into the concept of gamification, but how are we doing this in a novel way or a way that leverages technology to, not piss people off and ultimately make them more productive?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great point. And we see, based on different industries, certain levels of, technology that the teams have. Some teams are still using a whiteboard. Other teams have very advanced CRMs.
I have a whiteboard in my office. I put my clients every month on it. And I'm so excited when I get to put down another new client. And I noticed too, we have a new sales team in the new sales room. They put the same thing up in their board.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think some combination of it is good. But for technology, if you're able to pull in that data more easily and then visualize it and gamify it,
right,
it saves so much time. I mean, we talked to some sales managers that spend hours a day or they need multiple people to run a competition.
Yeah.
And then the sales team doesn't know where they stand at any point. So how can they really compete or battle to win if they don't know where they stand? But if that data is able to come in more real time, and it doesn't even have to be real time, even daily could be enough for a lot of competitions, then you see people fighting it out to the last minute, to the bitter end. And that's when you really see a huge boost in productivity and the excitement and engagement of the team around that.
Right. The idea of showing progress, because not only does it let people know where they stand, but it can actually increase productivity because now they're competing more because they can see they're close, or, they get more excited in it because they get more motivation.
Exactly. Just yesterday, we ran an internal competition on sending out customized videos, something we've talked about and, shared some laughs on some of the outreach we've seen. But there was down to the wire, the last minute of the competition, people inputting their videos and getting them out just to get to that next level, to get, really the recognition. There are coins associated with it, which can, translate to physical prizes, but really that recognition and the, confidence that comes with it.
And I think ultimately that's the excitement you want to generate, right? You want your sales team to feel like they're having fun doing their job, because sales can be fun, right? The people who like to do sales, for the most part, I think enjoy certain elements of it. I always hate when people have said, hey, you're friendly and good at talking to people, you'd be great at sales. I'm like, sure, but like that's not what makes you good at sales necessarily. It's enjoying the process, it's dealing with rejection, it's all these other things. And I think that's probably back to our psychology of like what actually makes a good salesperson.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that recognition and that motivation, like if you're on a sales floor and you sell something and ring a bell, that kind of style, like that's immediate satisfaction that person is getting. Everyone in that sales floor notices that bell rung and that you sold something. But when you're remote, and dispersed across the country or across the globe, how do you have that same sort of immediate celebration? And the paycheck is great, but that happens sometimes months after the sale. That's not doing a whole lot to motivate it.
Of friendly competition too.
Exactly.
Key on friendly, but I think you made me think of another leaderboard example too that wasn't as traumatizing as 8th grade algebra, but recently March Madness, right? That's something a lot of people participate in, and I think for me, I've run a pool. You participate in my pool every year. It's so much fun seeing how you're doing compared to people, especially in like that first 4-day weekend of who's leading now. Is this person, am I going to beat my dad, and am I going to beat my sister? Like, oh, I can't believe this person's leading. Like that type of, once you pick your bracket, you're not putting any input into it, but you're seeing where you're standing compared to other people. And it's, a lot of excitement, or at least it's something I look forward to every year.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's huge until a couple of rounds later and your bracket's busted and you've got no shot.
I don't know. I think it was even worse for me this year. I finished 1 out of the money in 4th place. So really, I was just the
Oh,
first
that's
loser.
brutal.
Yeah.
I was like the 30th loser.
Yeah, there you go. Well, my 6-month-old came in last because we picked her bracket based off which mascot liked milk more. So she had two number one seeds losing in the first round. A lot of the cat teams were going really far, so Arizona losing hurt her. So, it's a tough bracket, but she'll do better next year.
That's tough. Yeah, I love the concept.
Yeah. So anything, we're slowly wrapping up here, but anything you want to touch on regarding gamification or misconceptions, or that you feel like we didn't really touch on?
I think we touched on a lot.
Yeah.
I think it is important to consider the gamification gone wrong and trying to create strategies that will really help. I love that you touch on so many points about different generations or more senior people. And it doesn't mean gamification can't work. It just means you have to think about it a different way.
And it looks different. Like, no one's too old for friendly competition. My grandfather still plays golf and shoots his own age half the time, and he's 90 years old. Like, it's, I think people love competing. They love, seeing how they stack up in things. You just have to create it in a thoughtful way.
Absolutely. And, kind of one last thought is the gamification, if it's only driving the company goals and not the individual players, it's not going to succeed. You really need to gamify towards what that person is interested in. What are their goals? Gamify that, and they should be aligned with the organization.
Well, so to expound upon that, their goals in terms of what's going to help them be more successful in the job, ultimately.
Yeah. What's going to make them be more successful? What'll make them feel that sense of accomplishment?
Yeah. Something that ultimately moves the needle at the end of the day. Don't gamify something that isn't ultimately going to help them sell more. Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right. That makes sense. So, aside from being a gamification expert, you're working remotely well before everyone started working remotely a couple of years ago. Probably one of the true digital nomads that I know. Every time I talk to you, you're in a different place, a different country, something. So what are your tips for folks, looking to live that true remote work life?
Absolutely. I think that now it's so much easier to be remote, and there are challenges. For me, I love being able to experience culture and live where I want to live.
Yeah.
So some of the challenges of being remote aren't such a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's not all great. Sometimes you have internet troubles, or living here in Mexico, sometimes we don't have running water, or the power goes out, and trying to navigate the Mexican bureaucracy to make it, make our house function.
Never mind doing all this with a young son.
Exactly. But the love of experiencing the culture and food and everything else is more than enough to motivate me to continue being remote. Yeah. And more technology can make me feel a lot more connected with the organization and the rest of the team.
Especially if everyone else is remote too, to the point you were saying before we started recording. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's usually, we usually say what gets people motivated, what gets them out of the bed in the morning. So I think you answered that pretty well. So really appreciate you coming on. Kevin Streber of SalesScreen. Thanks so much. And I hope to have you back sometime to talk about more horror stories of gamification gone wrong.
That sounds great. I'd love to. Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thanks, Kevin.